Absolutely stupendous. Everyone, thank you for joining us tonight on Cyber Judo. Really appreciate it. Like I was just saying a little bit earlier before I started the recording, my illustrious co-host, Travis DeForge, is not going to be with us tonight, but no worries. We got Michael Hallman, who's going to be assisting me here. He'll be helping me admit people into the Zoom and kicking the baddies out if we got any bad actors that start spamming us and that kind of stuff. And then also, Mike, if you could for me, if there's any big questions that come in, feel free to just call it out and I'll address those as they're coming in. Cool beans?
No worries.
Okay. Thank you so much for being a good sport. Really appreciate all of your assistance and contributions. That being noted, team, I'm really excited and elated about what we're going to be hitting on tonight. So last week, we had the opportunity of talking about a couple different tools that we leverage quite a bit when we're doing open source intelligence gathering, when we're doing penetration testing, that kind of stuff. And that was Legion and Secret Searcher. And while they are fantastic tools and I love them, and they're tools that have been created by members of my team, and I'm very proud of their hard work, there's also a lot of fantastic tools out there that unfortunately we haven't created, but are still really, really, really cool. And Maltego is probably one of my favorites. It is a tool that a lot of people will initially hear about when they start to get into open source intelligence gathering, and maybe they'll play a little bit with the like interface and scrape the tip of the iceberg. But the challenge is that a lot of folks, when they initially see it, it looks daunting and challenging, and they're not necessarily certain how to kind of take it on and absorb it. And it's really not as complex as a tool as it initially comes off. And what I hope to do in this about hour session here is break down all the big components of Maltego, the ins and outs of how to use it, what is it used for, also, a lot of great plugins and transforms, how to optimize it from a performance standpoint, how you can leverage it for different types of engagements, open source intelligence gathering for businesses versus individuals, and doing forensics work and threat intelligence gathering, all that kind of stuff, right? And so this is going to be one of those tools in your wheelhouse where it's like a Swiss Army knife that you can continuously come back to and leverage all the time, right? So that being noted, I got my screen shared open for you guys. And one of the things I'm just going to kind of pop open is we got the Maltego website. So let's get down to a couple different things first. And I want to get out of the way of really what is Maltego and how can you leverage it? So first and foremost, Maltego is a very complex tool, what it looks like initially, but its simplicity is in the fact of its functionality. Its functionality is it aggregates data, it classifies data, it visualizes data, and then helps you transform that data. That's all it really does in a nutshell. It has a very heavy bent and slant towards forensics work, open source intelligence gathering, and for investigations, right? That being said, you could actually leverage it to do a lot of other things that it's not meant to do necessarily per se. A great example would be you could have something like I don't know, maybe you're doing some type of investigative work on money that has been laundered through Bitcoin or something like that. You can take a Bitcoin wallet address, and then you can start to dive into the transactions that might be associated with a particular wallet and hunt down where those funds have been laundered to and that kind of stuff. And by the way, I've even had personal situations where I've had to investigate those things, or actually professional situations where maybe some bad actor who is working at a business was siphoning off funds from the business and then trying to basically put it through some type of cryptocurrency or some blockchain, right, to obscure it and whatnot. Fortunately, those are situations that do occur when you're dealing with internal rogue actors. That being said, what's one of the things that conventionally people will miss out on when they start to hear about Maltego is they think it is another open source tool. This is not a open source tool. This is a closed source tool. So that is one of the bummers to it, right? The company that's behind it, Paterva, is pretty good company. And what I will say is their commercial offerings are fairly reasonably priced. Why? How do I know? Well, because I have purchased the professional enterprise versions of Maltego in the past and leveraged them, right? So I'm not one of those people who just uses the freemium or community tools and abuses them while my business makes money from it. Anytime where I really do have to leverage and utilize Maltego for heavy lifting, especially when I'm processing massive data sets, I'm going to go out and I'm going to purchase their professional or their enterprise license, right? And they make a pretty good solution. So again, first and foremost, closed source. runs on pretty much any platform that you want. Why? Because it's Java based. I know when you hear Java, might make you cringe a little bit, but at least runs on Linux, runs on Mac OS, runs on Windows, very easy to install, right? There's the couple different versions of it. You got the community, professional, and enterprise. The community can do actually a lot and really doesn't have a ton of limitations. The limitations really are just the size of the data sets that you can interface and interact with at a time. That's pretty much it, right? There's a couple of additional plugins that you can't leverage with the community version versus the professional or enterprise, but those plugins are usually plugins that are going to cost you a bit of money anyways. So if you didn't have the money for the professional edition, you probably didn't have the money for the plugins to go along with it. And when I say the plugins, these are third-party integrations and plugins, right? So Community Edition does require somebody to create an account and register an account. So this is a tool that you will have to register an account with an email address. And when you go to open up Maltego and you go to use it, you cannot use it in an offline mode, conventionally speaking, right, without being logged in with your registered account. If you want to use an email address that's not associated to you or whatever, be my guest, not a big deal. I don't give a fuck, right? But when it comes to using it on a consistent basis, you'll need an account. There is a version of Maltego that we're going to get into in a moment. With the case files, which you can leverage and utilize offline. And the case file component is less about the technology aspects of like looking at IP addresses and domain names and, you know, hashes and that kind of stuff, and more of connecting relationships that might exist between groups. And you can think of groups as in like, if you were a detective, you're trying to find the association between a gang and a set of leaders and a set of events that have been occurring, right? You can do a case file and mapping for that, right? And this software is not just leveraged by folks in the cybersecurity community, but also law enforcement and by a few governments, right? The professional edition basically gets you the capability of, at that juncture, being able to do almost anything you want, because you can pretty much interact with about 64,000 entities and transforms at once, right? By bare minimum. And at that point, unless you're doing even heavier lifting, which I'd probably say maybe you want to then look at doing an elk stack or something like that, it's going to be able to work with your needs quite well. And it's about $1,000 for a year. That is cheap, right? Especially when you go to compare that to like other tools that might exist out there that are commercial offerings and whatnot, like your Cobalt Strike, your Metasploit, that kind of stuff, right? So very reasonably priced commercial offering still. So that being noted, I'm going to pull up in the tool right here for you guys. We have a very interesting user interface. Again, it looks a little bit daunting at first, but we can simply break it down with a couple of our different windows and views here. So first and foremost, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on to the left hand side here with the entity palette. So I was speaking about earlier, you can have case files and you can establish a relationship between a lot of different objects here. So this entity view, if you just scroll right through it, shows you all the different types of entities that could possibly exist. So you're going to have a company, right, associated to a gang, within a particular industry, and maybe some type of, I don't know, meeting occurs or something like that, right? And what we can do is we can draw relationships between these objects and visualize these objects doing various things, right? So at the end of the day, again, this is a tool that is, we're putting data into it, we're classifying the data, and then we're drawing relationships between these pieces of data and visualizing it for ourselves. Doesn't always have to be technical information, right? You can have a mix of those data types there. That being noted, what I am going to do is I'm just going to Control Z all of those off of there so I can just focus to this particular entity that's in front of us. So we can click and drag entities. That's kind of cute and nice and that kind of stuff. But you know what? We can also copy and paste entities. So for example, if I just go to this, I don't know, Maltego site here and I just hit copy, right? And then I go here and I just Control V that. Hey, that's really interesting. When I pasted this object, it actually automatically knew that this was a URL. So one of the cool things about Maltego is the way we can import and export data within it, right? So one of the ways that we can obviously import data is by manually creating entities and filling out the details of those entities. We can also copy and paste. You could copy and paste basically a list up to 50 IP addresses, and paste it down into Maltego, and it'll understand that they're all IP addresses and create that specific type of entity. The reason why it classifies different data sets into different types of entities, like an IP address versus, let's say, a domain name, is because they're different things that you would want to, from an autonomous standpoint, transform in different ways. You could have an IP address, for example, be looked up on Shodan. You could have a domain, and maybe you want to do subdomain discovery on that, right? So there are different types of objects, there are different types of information that we can get different details from, right? So we can see automatically it determined that this was a URL on our behalf. If we go to paste in other types of information, it's going to try to determine what that entity is on our behalf. So again, if let's say I was just going to real quick here, type in John Smith, and I just take John Smith here and just going to Control A, Control C, and Control V it. You can see when I pasted it in here, it didn't understand John Smith. It created automatically what's called a phrase. Okay, well, we know John Smith's actually a person. I need to change that. How do I go to change that? Well, when I right-click my entity, I can start to interact with this entity. And one of the things that I can do is these little icons down at the bottom are quick icons that can allow us to interface with it. And this third icon in allows me to change the type of entity. Okay, cool. So when I click that, I can go under, okay, people, right? And oh, you know what? This is a drug dealer. John Smith's a drug dealer, right? And so now I've changed that entity and converted it, right? And I can manipulate it in different ways now. So now when I right click it, I get different transform options that are available to me. So depending on the type of entity that you have at a given moment, when you right click it, you can perform different types of operations and different types of transforms. We'll get into what transforms are more specifically in just a brief moment. That being said, give me one quick second. Just going to double check our chat. No big questions have come in yet. Awesome. Fantastic. I'm going to take that as I've been doing an awesome job. So transforms. What's the best way to break down transforms? Well, always looking at the goodies in the store. So at the top here, and you'll always get this when you first open Maltego, is there's the Transform Hub. They'll pop open like this, and it'll show you all these different Transform Hub partners. You can think of these as third-party plugins and integrations. Some of them cost money, some of them don't. Some of them cost money because it's the third party that's charging a particular fee, right? Some of them you have to have, again, the professional version of Maltego. In most cases, you can install a lot of great transforms yourself that are really fantastic, really helpful, and don't cost you any money. So I'm going to call out some of the really good ones here in just a second that I like to use when I'm just doing a quick and dirty analysis on something. Give me one quick second. Looks like my screen sharing session for my lab expired, the token on it. Those damn security controls are way too tough on it. So give me one quick second. That session timeout's like 30 minutes on it. So bear with me here. Okie doke. And let me share that open again for you guys. And all I'm going to say is, Dennis, why do you and Shane always have to make everything so secure for our infrastructure, like my remote management agent of my lab? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so we have right here a couple different ways in which we can filter the types of transforms and plugins that are available to somebody. So if you wanted to focus on, let's say, breaches and leaks, you can click that and it'll filter to that quite nicely. And look at that. Ooh, have I been pwned? Everyone knows have I been pwned, right? That's a classic, right? And you can get an have I been pwned API key, right? So we can focus to things that are more in the threat intelligence domain, forensics domain, or just general open source intelligence gathering. And again, like I was noting, you can do open source intelligence gathering that is both business centric. So on a particular enterprise, their information systems, that kind of stuff. but also to individuals, a particular individual on social media, trying to understand what their habits are, what their interests are, so that you can break into their particular set of accounts or whatever, right? Obviously, all legit, all within scope of a social engineering engagement that's approved by a customer. So that being noted, some of my favorites here, I'm just going to have everything selected for you guys. So the case file entities. The case file entities are really cute and cool, especially if you're just trying to illustrate to somebody a particular concept or a hypothetical scenario of like, hey, if a malicious actor was going to break into your systems and execute through a particular kill chain, right, they would jump here, here, and here, and here, and here, and do these types of things, or these particular events would occur in this process, right? So the case file entities is always really cool to have around. You can use these offline as well. So it doesn't hurt installing those. A couple of other good ones that I like to install is Abuse CEH. They have the Abuse IPDB. I didn't install this one because I don't have an API key for it, but I think you can get a free API key for it. So a lot of these things you can get free API keys for. Alien Vault OTX, this is one of my favorites, alongside MISP, which are threat intelligence exchanges, right? You can get API keys for both of those. Census, it's a competitor to Shodan. I'm sure everyone knows Shodan.io here. If not, you gotta know it. I mean, get it. It's awesome. It's the Google of devices on the interwebs. And then there's a lot of other cool ones when it comes to Clearbit. So you got, by the way, tons of, more commercial tools like CrowdStrike and whatnot. I am not a huge CrowdStrike Intel person, so I have not leveraged that particular integration. I don't know if it's good or not. I know that CrowdStrike makes a lot of awesome solutions, so I'd imagine it's probably pretty good. But you can see it goes on and on and on and on and on, right? Hunter, we leverage Hunter for collecting a lot of email addresses for people. Have I been pwned? Hybrid analysis is one of my favorites. I love hybrid analysis. I almost use that all the time alongside VirusTotal as well. So it goes on and on and on, right? And what I would recommend is, again, installing a couple that you have API keys for. You got to get the Shodan one. That's like a foundational one. Threat Miner, that's another foundational one. VirusTotal, that's a really fantastic one. TinEye, if you're trying to figure out what a particular image came from, there's a lot of times where I'm trying to figure out a particular bad actor who's been using a social media profile icon across a couple different sites and trying to figure out like, where is the rest of this path going. Wayback Machine, that's really another fun one, especially if you're trying to do some really fantastic open source intelligence gathering on a business, and you find that maybe in their historical versions of their site they put too much information out there. That's always really great to have. So first thing you always want to do when you first get Maltego, you get it installed on your PC, install those transforms, create some API keys for yourself with Shodan, a couple of these other fantastic solutions that are there. I'd say Shodan, VirusTotal, and OTX are bare minimums. And then Wayback Machine, so on and so forth, are pretty good. Once you've installed it, one of the things I do tend to recommend to people is go right into your options here. And you can configure a lot of different just kind of default GUI settings and how it handles transforms and whatnot. But Java options is a Java application, which means that you're going to run into some Java heap issues, right? If you don't do your memory management quite well. Luckily, it allows us to define that right here. And what we can do is we're just going to bring out that bad boy all the way up there. The reason being is that this application is going to be collecting a lot of data, graphing relationships between that data, and then visualizing it, and could get really RAM heavy and really intense quite quickly, right? So I do not recommend running this on any computer with less than 8 gigs of RAM. It is not going to run consistently and stable, right? If you're doing just maybe 15, 20, 30 entities at a time, yeah, you could probably do less than 8 gigs of RAM. But after that, it's going to start to get a bit hairy and whatnot. And one of the things I do also recommend is that when you're working with a particular, what we call graph, which is a graph is just a project file, right? This is a project file that contains entities and the relationships between those entities. Make sure that you're saving often, okay? And when you go to save a particular graph and case file, what's really, really cool is you can encrypt it too. So when you go to encrypt it, it'll ask you for a passphrase, symmetric encryption. It's cute. It's, just little things like that are nice little pieces of polish and whatnot in case you got sensitive data that's going to be contained within this particular graph. By the way, for some folks who maybe are working on a team, one of the things is really, really neat about Maltego is if you go up to this collaboration tab, you can actually take your graph and you can share it. And you can host a Maltego server, and you can actually have it where you and your colleagues are doing open source intelligence investigations together in real time, seeing each other's cursors, interacting with the same entities. So you can even do that, by the way, with the community edition of Maltego. So it is really, really neat. They have a default public hosting server that you can leverage and utilize if you want to share out your graph, or you can just set up your own hosting server. So there's a bit of flexibility there depending on like how your feelings are with trusting other people, you know? But I think that I would be quite remissful if I didn't call out the collaboration feature being like next level type of stuff and making things a lot easier. I've had a lot of situations where I'm working with massive data sets, and a couple of my teammates, we're trying to, out of 3,000 IP addresses, determine which ones are actually owned by the customer, and those are the IP addresses that we're going to focus on, doing all of our vulnerability analysis and exploitation on. So how do you sort the wheat from the chaff there, and doing that with a team makes it much, much easier. So as you guys can kind of see right here with Maltego, one of the things that I have in front of myself are the graph view, and I can zoom in and out. And as I zoom out, it'll show me down below a key. So you see drug dealer in orange and URL in green. I know the resolution's not fantastic here. The reason being is Windows always likes to choose really interesting DPI settings that don't really play too well with Java applications. So just keep that in mind. But that being noted, we can look at these entities and their relationships in a lot of different ways. So let me pull up an example graph that might be just a little bit more complex here. So we have an example graph here of Maltego.com. We see all the IP addresses that are associated with Maltego.com, and we can see each of the different subnets that are associated. We have an ASN, autonomous system number here, right? And we have a set of locations that are associated to those autonomous system numbers. And it looks like we have some also companies that are associated with these ASNs, right? So we have a complex graph of relationships. We can visualize this in a couple different ways here. So I can zoom this out and I can just kind of see from a high level what those entities are. But what we can do on the side panel with the layout is we can essentially change this from a hierarchy view or a block hierarchy view to a straight hierarchy view. What we can also do is we can change this into a more of a circular or organic view, right? Now, what's great is that when you move these different views around, you can select your different entities and still move them however you wish. So if you want to group them into custom groups for yourself and whatnot, not a problem. That's, perfectly fine there. We can also, by the way, visualize some of how these relationships exist. So for example, I can visualize these with larger, quote unquote, graph ball entities that are ones that have more diverse dissenting entities. So something that has a lot of children that are differing children, right? I can also visualize things like the amount of incoming links. So the larger amount of incoming links will make this entity's ball larger, right? So this allows us to visually just pick out certain patterns of, okay, I see that there's a lot of things that are associated with this particular ASN here versus another set of ASNs, right? So this, again, just allows us to change how we're focusing our attention visually speaking. And we could still, by the way, draw relationships between these. We could still run transforms on these and move them around, all that kind of stuff. Now, you may find it when you're working with a particular graph like this one here that we're just going to put this to a regular standard graphical view with the icons. Okay. So you may find it where a lot of the objects will start moving around, particularly when you're running transforms, and maybe you don't want it to do that. So we have this little freeze here. And what that'll do is, even though it may be creating new entities, it's going to freeze this graph in state so that it doesn't keep messing with our eyeballs and our eyeballs don't fall over our heads, right? So that's a pretty neat one there. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, this is fine and dandy for those visual folks, but I need textual data to work with. Well, no problemo to that. What we can do is if we click this little listed menu view here, right, that then brings us into something that's very similar to essentially a spreadsheet, right? And so what we could do is we can then select every different entity in here, and we can see the amount of relationships, right? Incoming and outgoing relationships that exist for these entities, right? And the weights that are associated to those entities. We can obviously, by the way, bookmark entities by different just color codings, right? Or we can pin them, that kind of stuff, so that it makes it easier where it will then stick to our graph, right? In its current position and in place for us. So it doesn't, keep jumping around all over the place. By the way, both in the visual entity view as well as this textual entity view, we can then look at the specific properties of something. So I can look at this right here, and this detail view, honestly, the text is a little bit in poor resolution, mostly because Microsoft DPI isn't playing too well with this Java application here. But it's showing me some of the snippets of the data that it has from the Bing search results associated to this website, right? So I'm already seeing some of the properties and information that's associated with these entities as I'm selecting them and going through them, right? Now, you may be wondering to yourself, okay, well, that's great. I need to import or export data, right? In mass, more than just pasting it into my graphs here. That's not a problem at all. So when we click into our drop-down file view, essentially, we can go to import. And what's really cool is we can import third-party tables, essentially anything that's a CSV, right? And when we go to import a CSV, it's going to ask us to select a CSV or an Excel spreadsheet. And I don't have one offhand, but I'm going to show you in the export view in just a quick moment. It essentially allows us to define the columns and rows that we have and what those relationships mean. And then it's going to import those objects for us. So let's do this. We're going to hit export graph to table. And you see this view where it shows us two different columns, row or a column A and column B. And so column A is source entity, column B is target entity, right? So this is showing us a relationship that exists at the row level between those two different entities, right? So we can have it grouped that way. We can also have it group in a different set of ways where it's showing us, okay, here's the Maltego ASN, here's the ASN number, here's the network owner, country, and the city, right? We can also have it do what's called a flat map view, which is more machine readable, and a what we call denormalized or a normalized data set. And so there's a lot of different ways in which we can export the data to CSVs and import CSV data. So I would usually recommend to somebody who says, well, in the community version, I can't paste more than 50 objects at once. Not a big deal. Put it in a spreadsheet, import the spreadsheet. It's going to make your life way easier, bro. And when you go to import it, it'll say, hey, this column, everything that's in this column, what type of entity is it? Oh, it's an IP address. Everything that's in this column is a domain name. Oh, okay, cool. Not a problem. And then it'll create all of them. Hell, even if you have the entities already created, it'll say, hey, I noticed that you have entities here that already exist. Do you want me to create a duplicate? Or do you want me to merge the relationships automatically? So that means you could have many different spreadsheets with different types of entities and properties and relationships that exist between them and keep importing them and have it where it'll merge all that together into one entity with many different relationships and many different types of properties, right? So again, this is a fantastic tool for collecting and centralizing that data, right? Categorizing it and then visualizing all those relationships. So we can also, by the way, export all of our data into nice images, right? So you can have a nice image export, feature that in your pen test report. That's a good way to look really cool right there, my friend. I love putting Maltego graphs into my pen test reports and people go, oh, wow, that's fancy. Just make sure that whatever you have there is communicating something. If you have a picture, if you have an illustration in your report, make sure it's communicating something that's going to be helpful to the reader of the report. If you just have this fucking thing here like that and a report, they're going to be like, okay, cool. It's a bunch of fucking balls in a report. What do you want me to do with this shit? You know what I mean? So just, again, make sure it's readable and understandable to somebody, right? Now, we can create relationships between things manually. So we could say like, hey, this thing is related to that thing. And then we could create a label, right? Like, likes, So John Smith, who's a drug dealer, likes this thing, right? By the way, maybe it's the other way around, right? Well, in our views here, what we can do is at the top, all these different tabs, we can click entities, collections, transforms, machines, collaboration, import, export, and then view, and then investigate. The one that you're going to use the most is investigate here. And when you click investigate, you can select between entities or links. Links are your relationships. So if we click link selection, now I can click this link and I can work with this link. One of the things I could do is I could reverse that link easily. Or what I could do is I can then double click into it and change it, right? This link also can have a set of different properties associated with it. And every object that you click into can have a set of other properties associated to it, right? So it's not just a label on a visual graph that you're interacting with, but a larger data set, right? So when we work with something like a data set's at scale like this, it can get a little bit hairy because it's like, man, I need to clean up garbage data. I need garbage data out of my face. Or maybe I got redundant links and all that kind of stuff. Like, how am I going to select all this stuff and get the garbage out of my face, right? Like, for example, man, I don't need all these location entities. I ran a bunch of transforms. I got a bunch of garbage data. How do I get this garbage data out of my face? That's where this investigate view with all of these different selections are really, really helpful. And you can use the logic of these different types of relationships to make your life a lot easier. So for example, if I wanted to get rid of all these unnecessary locations, I could click into each one of these and delete them, right? But like I told you guys right before I started recording, I'm chief laziness officer. I'm lazy as fuck. I'm not going to be doing that, right? So what I'm going to do here is I can select by type and I can select all locations. Oh, and it just zoomed out. It selected all locations for me. Hell yeah. And now I can delete all those. We got all of them out of our face. Great. Awesome. Fantastic. You know what? But what about this? Maybe I want to select just the children of Maltego.com, right? I want just like all like these IPs here, right? So I can't say select all entity IP addresses. I need to just select just those ones. Well, what I could do is I could select Maltego.com. And then what I could do is I could say select children. And now everything that has a relationship that is downstream to Maltego.com, I can now select an interface with. Hey, you want to get even fucking lazier? Watch this shit. You can hit from there, select the children of those children, and select the children of those children, and select the children of those children. So you can chain your actions together in this really interesting way of what reminds me of computer information science fundamentals. You know, everyone is familiar with or and statements, right? And NOR gates and OR gates and that kind of stuff. And that's a little bit of what you're working with here, because what I could also say is, you know, hey, all these children here, what I want to do is I want to focus on these and I want to get everything else out of my face. So what I'm going to do actually is I can invert my selection here, right? So if I click this invert selection, now I'm selecting everything else. Now I can delete everything else and get out of my fucking face, right? So take the opportunity when you're first working with a lot of data sets in Maltego and it starts to get a little bit noisy for you to leverage these entity and link selection tools in a way where it's going to logically focus to the data that's most intriguing and interesting to you. And if you're not entirely certain what data you're trying to focus on first, then get rid of the low-hanging fruit of noisy information. That is probably one of the #1 challenges that I face and probably anyone else will face in Maltego is you're going to run tons of transforms, which are the coolest fucking part, by the way. I've been saving that to the last, right? Just to keep you guys waiting, right? But the fact of the matter is that when you run tons of transforms, it's going to collect all this data and it's going to shoot this fire hose of information at you. And you're like, okay, but what the fuck does this mean? And so being able to peel back unnecessary data, delete it, get it out of your face, focus on what's most important, and then be able to see the pattern and go, aha, that is a key weak area of their infrastructure. Aha, I see who's, you know, controlling the strings at this particular organization. Aha, I see that this person has a fascination with cats, and I'm fairly certain that if I run a password profile application on them, that I'm going to be able to figure out what their password is because it's a cat breed and their birthday, of course, you know, that type of stuff. So again, as much as possible, take the opportunity that when you're selecting the object, take a look at the type of entity relationships that exist there. I would also say, by the way, be really thrifty with if there's a grouping of items that are related to one another, that maybe it's all associated to, I don't know, maybe an organization or maybe a particular a technology, right? What you can do is then take all those and bookmark them, right? And when you bookmark all of these entities, then what you can do is you can then go back to that selection of that bookmark and say, okay, just those things, or everything but those things, right? So the bookmarks are not there just to be pretty little banners. That's for you to keep track of something and say, hey, that's related to something that's a particular category of interest for myself and an intrigue. And I want to leverage that a little bit later when I'm culling my data set down, right? So again, you can do this both with entities and links. So when you go back and forth, that allows you to focus on your link selection and your entity selection. If you're trying to draw a link between things, you would want to be in the entity selection mode. And then what you can do is you can then drag and pull, right, from the entity to another entity, and it'll do that. Okay. You then can write a label in or not have it write a label. Whatever you give a fuck about is your deal, right? You can change the thickness, by the way, of links, that kind of stuff. If you're ever like, oh, why can't I click that link? Because you got to go into link selection mode. Now you can do it. Okay. And when you select a particular entity, you can use the property review real quick here to kind of like, hey, I want this to be a dotted. I want this to be a real thick boy line here too, that kind of stuff, right? So again, a lot of flexibility when you're going between the link selection and the entity selection mode. So I want to give you guys the fundamentals of culling the data sets and sorting the data sets and being able to visualize the data sets and categorize the data sets, because now we're going to get to the cool part, which is the transforms, right? Where we're going to get the fire hose of data that's going to get shot at us. So let's start with something interesting. Okay. I'm going to select, go into entity selection mode here, select these entities that are relevant to me. So you guys know Enclave for Generous. I would at least hope you do, because we're on Cyber Judo right now. And Enclave for Generous is essentially the sister project that Blake and myself host, where we like to post a lot of cybersecurity leadership content and all that kind of stuff. And it's just kind of like a little wiki space, right? I have tips, tricks, and guides, and all the pen test tool databases and the NIST 800, series database. Like that's where all that shit's hosted, right? But let's do some open source intelligence gathering on these guys, right? What is behind that fantastically beautiful website? So when I click an entity and I particularly right click it, I can run a set of transforms. Now, noob mistake, don't run all transforms for all of your fucking plugins, right? It's going to exhaust all your API keys, right? And it's going to take forever to run these transforms, right? This is not black box magic, right? It has to reach out and get the data. So when you're collecting data with Maltego, realize that Maltego is more like a framework. And all these plugins are connected to the framework, and it's just making requests to these plugins, and these plugins are doing their own thing, right? Maltego is not making those requests directly. So let's say, for example, I was going to look up Enclave for Generous against Alien Vault OTX. It's going to leverage and utilize my Alien Vault OTX API key. I got a free one that's currently here, right? It's limited. It's finite, the amount of requests, right? So I don't want to just run it against everything all day long, right? So we have to be just really, really considerate and deliberate on what type of data we're looking for. Now, if we have a particular plugin like OTX here, we can click the little plus symbol and it'll then go into that and it'll show us the specific transforms that we can run under that particular plugin, right? We can also click this little back button here, then it'll show us all the other transforms we can run. So let me click Wayback Machine. We can see here, there's only one option there. Why don't we find something a little bit more interesting like standard transform? So if we go into that, we can say find on the web page, find an entity properties, find historical snapshots, look at the web technologies, right? So then we can continue to deep dive into those. So this is a nested set of actions. We can tell it to run all actions under a particular category or a particular plugin. It might just take a little bit of a long time, but let's do this. Let's start with what comes out of the box with Maltego. So we're going to just click standard transforms. We're going to hit the little double play button, means run everything under that fucking category, right? Holy shit. We just got a bunch of data thrown at us. Did I not say it was a fire hose? Okay. Wow. So first and foremost, before we get into all the pretty graphics, we have our transform output. Be very attentive to your transform output. Every single time it's making a request and it gets a result back or not a result, it's going to tell you here. If you're getting a bunch of errors down in here, make sure you take the opportunity to read the error messages. Usually it's because you've exhausted your API keys or your API limits for a particular API key, or maybe you didn't define an API key for a particular plugin, that kind of stuff, right? Or you're trying to run a transform on an entity or a data set that doesn't make sense. You could take John Smith, take that entity, convert it to an IP. Sure. And then when you go to run a transform against it, Schrodinger's going to be like, what the fuck is John Smith? I don't know how to look that up, right? You'll get a bunch of errors. So just be very receptive to your transform outputs, right? So that being noted and continuing forward here, Wowie, we got a ton of data from this website. So first and foremost, we can see, wow, I got way too much information on my website here. I'm a little embarrassed with myself right now. Look at this. It pulled the images. It pulled the pretty ass images from our website here. This is really, really cute. So we could see like the NIST database that we have and the starter guide to home self-defense, all that kind of stuff, right? So it pulled all those. It also knows that we're using Cloudflare for our CDN and for our WAF. That's good, right? All of my icons, phone. I don't know where I got this number listed. It probably interpreted some random string of numbers as a phone number. Oh, look at this. We can see it linked, our link. This is Blake's LinkedIn. Lysine Core, this is a Notion site. So it's linking back to a Notion site. Ooh, that might be something interesting to look at, set on fire. Oh, look, we got the Wayback Machine, right? So we can actually go and click into this and it'll tell us the URL for that particular Wayback Machine path, right? And we can look at previous versions of the site when it was ugly as hell, right? Well, I guess that's implying it's not ugly right now. But we got cyberjudo.com here. So there's cross relationships between that. So a lot of good, interesting information. Oh, Christian's GitHub, right? These people are way, way too chatty, right? They have way too much information here, right? From an open source intelligence gathering perspective. So that was just with a standard transform. Let's do something else. Let's find something else that's kind of interesting. So we can just select all these entities, delete that out. So everybody knows that I work for a company called Go Vanguard, right? So we'll just click and drag in domain here, and let's just double click that, change it to govanguard.com. Okay, fantastic. So this is a domain name. Okay, so we could do a couple different things under here. Let's see if Go Vanguard's ever been caught up in anything sus. Let's run our OTX transforms against that real quick. There's a little progress bar at the bottom, all that kind of stuff, by the way. And you can say it says 94%. Give it its time. Sometimes you could run a set of transforms that could take, man, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes sometimes, right? It can get really, really crazy. So let's take a quick look at our comments here in the chat. Social media management and reputation management. Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad one, actually. That would be pretty cool. Yeah, so, yeah. So we can see right here that it already did a bunch of subdomain discovery for us. Look at this, chumbucket.govanguard.com. Dennis, what's going on there? I bet there's something delicious, though.
I wouldn't visit it if I were you, but
oh, look at this. Got nougat.chumbucket.govanguard.com. So you guys know that these folks must be leveraging NuGet repositories for some of their Windows infrastructure. Ooh, fancy stuff there. Now we got a bunch of these green things here. These are banners. So it's pulling our banner data. So if we click into a particular banner, we can see some of the properties and attachments. This is just a banner back to Keybase. Okay, so these folks use Keybase. Looks like one of their pen testing endpoints you might be able to figure out. Ooh, there's a hash. So what type of hash is this? This is a where's the relationship to this hash? Oh, it's just a hash of the direct domain. Okay, so it's not listed here. We can right click this and can we run this against, run that one against OTX? Does it get flagged as malicious? Hopefully not. Oh, it's associated to another hash. Well, what's that mean? SS deep. I don't know what that is. I don't know. It's still running. We'll see what it'll find here. Now, I see. What are these other sites here? One-to-one education. How did it establish this? Oh, shares email. What? I don't know. I'm gonna have to go take a look at this. This is sus stuff, man. These guys, they gotta go check out their site, you know. But anyways, we can see that they're using some level of Azure infrastructure, and it looks like we don't even use Rico. I don't know where I got this from. Oh, I know what it is. We use HubSpot as our our website hosting provider. And these are other domains that are using HubSpot as well. That's
shared hosting for that IP address.
It's shared hosting for the IPs, and it's determining the relationships based on that. Ah, that's good. Very interesting. Intriguing. So we can see just by running a couple of simple transforms that we could get a lot of data thrown at us really, really quickly, and it can be a bit much. Let's take a look at something that's sus shit. This is sus shit right here. Download-instantly.com. This is a really sus domain. Don't go to it. Okay, so let's check. Does this hit any of the abuse DBs or anything like that? This one should hit an abuse DB, no? Oh, shame on them. Let's run through OTX. This should have all types of sus. Yeah, tons of sus malware and hashes with it. Okay, cool, fantastic. And now each of these hashes, right, you can essentially then line back to various indicators of compromise. So we can see right here, detections, claim AV, malware, install core, right? So yeah, not good stuff at all. JSON file uploaded, VT graph, ransomware. Ooh, no. Yeah, not good stuff at all. Yeah, very, very gross. Now, great thing is that we're looking at this downloadinstantly.com without ever even having to touch it or interface with it directly ourselves, right? And actually, one of the cool transforms in our transform hub, I think, is the, I want to say, yeah, urlscan.io. I don't have a urlscan.io API key, but it looks like they got some plans here that are, you know, probably reasonably priced, right? And you can hook that up, and then you can have it scan each of those URLs for you too. So that's cute. So we've got a couple IP addresses here. Let's take a look at, you know, I don't know. One of these I think I got lined up for you guys already, this IP. So this was an interesting one I came across earlier. Let's run this bad boy through Shodan. I'm a Shodan guy here. So again, we're just running across every potential Shodan transform that could ever exist here. So we can see, grabbed a couple banner hashes. So I fingerprinted the site. We got an ASN here. It looks like it's associated with Microsoft somehow. Amsterdam, Netherlands. It's got a self-signed certificate. Ooh, 3389, port 3389. We all know that as remote desktop. Hell yeah. So pop right into that. And let's take a look at the Bitfull banner right here. Ooh, look at this. This is an interesting system. SCADA-perf-iBox. Now, what I've done here so far, by the way, I'm using Shodan. Maltego didn't grab this data directly. There was no active scanning from my computer to this system or anything like that. All that occurred was this IP address was submitted in an API request to Shodan. Shodan did the lookup, returned back the results to Maltego, and Maltego collected it and graphed those out for me with all the relationships, right? So what's really great about this tool is that we're not doing any active analysis right now. You're not exposing your own public IP address, right, for wherever you're coming from. And that's particularly helpful to know and be cognizant of, because the fact is that at least when we do a lot of our pen testing, we don't have people do it from their own home addresses, right, or their own home internet connections. All of our staff members, when we do our pen testing, we do it from a pool of ephemeral virtual machines that we provision in Azure from a set of subnets that we own, right, that we're authoritative for, right? But the thing is can you imagine running a tool like this in a virtual machine, right? Over the interwebs? It's really, really hefty. It's a pain in the ass. So what's great is you can run this locally and you're not doing any active analysis. There's no real impact to anything or anything like that here, right? So some set of instances and stories I got for you guys here. So one of the first times that I had to really get serious about leveraging Maltego, and why I personally love it so much, is when I had to purchase an enterprise edition, because I had a internet service provider come to me and they said, hey, we want you to pen test our systems. And I said, cool. Yeah. Tell me give me a list of your data center infrastructure. And like, yeah, okay. So they came back to me with spreadsheet, usual. And there's a lot of /24s and /16s in there. I was like, yeah, that's really big for public stuff, but I guess they're an internet service provider, makes sense. And then I just did a quick calculation. I was like, I wonder how many IPs we're talking about. They gave me 1.5 million fucking IP addresses to do external network pen testing on. How the fuck do you start with that one? You think you're going to run a Nessus scan, big boy? Oh, you think you're going to run an Nmap scan and get anywhere? Not happening. Not anytime soon.
Right? Good thing Travis showed us those Nmap tips, or else we'd never get through
that. So the way that you're going to have to, when you're working with really, really large data sets like that, is you're going to have to use tools like Shodan and Census, right? And if you're doing that directly in the web UI, damn, it's going to be painful. My recommendation is get super lazy. Take all those subnets, put them in a spreadsheet, you import them in here, let Shodan do all your busy work for you. Have it graph out all the relationships. Then from there, have it list out all the banners. Filter based on the ports and services and banners that are open, right? Filter to the only interesting ports and banners that have a lot of interesting vulnerabilities and exploits associated to them. Look at that. Now you just culled the data set of 1.5 million IP addresses down to a reasonable 100,000, right? Now from there, what you can do is you say, how do I know the difference between the ISP's data center infrastructure versus maybe one of their customers? Well, what you could then do from there is you can then search through the banner types, because maybe you can look for an indicator like a host name, right? It's always the ISP because it always has the host name, that's associated with their company or something like that, or it always spits out a telnet banner, right? That's indicative of a signature that's their company, right? Now you've taken a data set and gotten it down from 100,000 to now maybe a more reasonable 5,000 systems that you can rampage through, right? So that would be a conventional way in which you could leverage Maltego beyond just the standard open source intelligence gathering, social engineering, building a social engineering campaign, building your pretext, that kind of stuff, where you can leverage it for more of an actual network pen testing perspective. Obviously, it's external, right? Because you're working with external data sources. And then also, one of the other reasons why I love it was, again, another fantastic story. I had a customer many years ago come to me and they said, hey, listen, we found a vulnerability with our web interface. Every time a user goes to register, what would happen is that accidentally in the request body, once they've registered to the site, they wouldn't see it directly, but in the request body, unbeknownst to them, there was the password and username of the previous user who had registered right before them. Okay, that's a really interesting vulnerability and weakness. The developers happened to find out about it because somebody submitted a bug ticket who was exhibiting some really strange symptoms of their password was not getting reset correctly. They happened to kind of, stumble upon it. And they came to us and they said, hey, how do we know if there's any malicious actors who have found out about this and are exploiting it or have exploited it? Well, can you give me all your AWS ELB logs? And I can take a look. And what I can do is I can start looking at all the IP addresses that have been making all these requests against all of your AWS ELBs, your load balancers. And then what I can do is I can start to statistically determine if there's any level of IP addresses or subnets that are fairly innocuous and that are fairly obvious and stand out because they're making way too many requests. Also, what I can do is I can take the list of all the IP addresses that have ever interfaced with your AWS ELB, and I can run them against threat intelligence exchanges to determine which ones are conventionally flagged as malicious. Also, what I can do is I'll take the IP addresses and I'll associate which ones are associated with business and enterprise customers versus personal home internet service connections. This way, what we can do is we can cull down the data set further. And through that, I was able to take wow, we just had this major data leakage event. We don't know if a bad guy exploited it or not. We don't know who knows about it. We don't know what the scope and scale is, right? All we know is it started back on this date here. Where do we start? And I was able to leverage a tool like Maltego to import massive amounts of data sets into it, right? Cull it down and be able to determine, hey, yeah, see right here, here, and here. Yeah, there's only a couple IP addresses that look funky. And those couple IP addresses that look funky, no worries. It's your Datadog Health Watch monitors. So you're good. Yeah, everything looks hunky-dory here. You're good. We have objective scientific data to prove that a malicious actor did not at least exploit this. Maybe some bad guy saw it once or twice or something like that, but they certainly didn't exploit or do anything at scale. So those are just a couple of, I think, really good scenarios, real world scenarios in which you can leverage this powerful tool. So to that, I'm going to open up to big questions, concerns, thoughts here. Hopefully this has been really educational for you guys. Yeah.
This is one of the cooler programs that you've introduced us to, in my opinion.
Yeah, right. I mean, last week, Secret Searcher and Legion Man. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. Certainly, again, I'm really proud of the tools that we develop in-house and what we work on. But Perturba has really developed a fantastic solution. And I'm not sponsored by them. I don't get any money from them, or anything like that. But it certainly saved my ass a ton of times. Mike Hallman, you've been working with the SBI for a little bit here, doing some work with them, and so I'd love to get your perspective here. Have you had the opportunity of deep diving into Maltego over there, or any of your past experiences?
Not over there. In my past, yes. There used to be I'm not entirely sure if they've exfiltrated it out, if it's there anymore, but there used to be a way to do vulnerability scans with Maltego, with I thought it was an offshoot program called Teeth, like Maltego Teeth, if I'm remembering that correctly. I'll have to search it out and maybe get back to you, but I'm almost positive there was some sort of like plugin or where you could do that. But this was many moons ago.
There's many community plugins out there that people have developed. Some of them are kind of sus. And so I have not, to that point, gone through some of the better community plugins that are not in the Transform Hub. I think that would be a fantastic follow-up. So I will add that to my Notion to do. And maybe that'll be a really great post that we'll have in the future to accompany this episode here. So thank you for calling that out. And to that thought process, any folks who are like, the Dennises of the world, where it's like, hey, you want to like find a way to leverage this tool, right, and create some cool set of scripts or plugins that associate with it. They do have the developer documentation out there. You can create plugins. It doesn't cost you money to create your own plugins for this, right? So you can just kind of, connect it right in there. I'm not going to presume it's going to be absolutely perfect. It's Java, but it's something. So that being noted here, do you create a username? Yeah. So when you go to the Perturba website and you go to download it, it'll ask you to register and create an account, a username and email address. When you go to log in, it's your actual email address though. Email address and password. And it'll ask you almost every single time, like fucking clockwork. It can be annoying sometimes. That's probably my biggest gripe about Maltego, to be completely transparent. Oh, you know what? Bonus round here. One last item. So you think it's pretty cool to fucking run transforms, right? Yeah, right click and it does some stuff for you. But what if you wanted to have something like, I don't know, a company stalker? You put in a company name. It finds all the domains associated to that company, then finds all the emails associated to the company, and then finds the people, right? It's a multi-stage transform process right there, right? That's the next level shit. No, not with Maltego here. So with Maltego, we can run what are called machines, right? And what machines are, is it's a package of transforms, right, that run one after another based on the previous data from the previous transform, right? And we can create our own machines too, right? So let me just go here, and under machines, we can manage our machines, create new machines, all that kind of stuff. Here's a couple of the standard machines that come in by default. Here's their company stalker one that's there packaged by default, right? And then you can start spinning it up and putting information in there. Now we're just about at time, but after you play with the transforms, after you get familiar with the UI, after you can massage the data types, start to take the opportunity to play with the machines and create some of your own machines. Okay? So that being said, is there any last big questions or concerns or items? Let's just triple check here. GB hackers, vulnerability scanning using Maltego. What's the plugin called here? Let's take a quick gander. Oh,
I think-
Maltego tea. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it is called Teeth. I sent it to you in a PM because, as you said, there are people out there that make malicious tools. So I'll let you kind of be the judge of that since you have a lot of experience with it.
I can't read any code anymore. Man, I coded like 15 years ago. I'm too old for that stuff now.
Only you knew reverse engineer that's right next to you.
Almost. If I could only figure out his name. David? Diego.
I think his name
No,
is
Dennis!
Shane, if I remember correctly.
I was saying you, man. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, it looks like it is if it's an aptitude repository. I'm going to have a follow-up post for this. This will give everybody something to thumbs up on LinkedIn a little bit later. So thank you, Zachariah. Much appreciated. And Cameron, thank you on the Secret Lab Chair. This is I think a 2020 edition. So maybe for 2023, we're going to get a new one. So the leather isn't antagonized with so many farts. So that being said, team, I really appreciate everybody's time tonight. And we'll get some more time on the calendar for next week. Have a good night now. Bye.
Thank you, Chris.
So, guys.